All right, I'm about to hit the golf course. That's why I'm in this attire. We're doing a Chat Sports Open today, a nice little competition between everybody inside the office. But wanted to bring you a new show and video because there's growing buzz about a potential Jimmy Garoppolo trade at some point down the road following the DK Metcalf contract extension. This is the 49ers Report. I'm Chase Sr. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've been giving you the best 49ers training camp content, and we're going to continue to do that. So if you want to stay in the know, sub now and turn on those notifications. So buzz growing that Garoppolo could get dealt to the Seattle Seahawks. This really coming from Jeff Darlington of ESPN, as well as Matt Mayoko, NBC Sports Bay Area, who's obviously arguably the most tapped-in reporter when it comes to the Niners. This coming after DK Metcalf signed that contract extension with the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, Deebo Samuel and his looming contract status also ties into this. The DK Metcalf contract extension, for those of you who don't know, 3 years, so it's actually shorter in length, more upfront and guaranteed money, though, as compared to some of these other deals that we've seen throughout this offseason as the wide receiver market has exploded. In total, 3 years, $72 million. 31 guaranteed at signing, and then $58 million in total. So that rounds out to $24 million on an average annual value basis. Obviously, this impacts Deebo Samuel. It actually might be good for San Francisco in these negotiations, because if DK Metcalf's getting $24 million per year, I don't think that Deebo is going to be in the high 20s. And if DK takes a shorter deal, maybe San Francisco, maybe even Deebo Samuel can work out a shorter term deal as well. There are injury issues with Deebo, so to avoid you getting crushed at any point in the deal, if an injury happens, if quarterback play is subpar, if Deebo Samuel falls off and ages quickly, there are some financial aspects of that DK Metcalf deal that I'm fascinated to see how it impacts what Deebo is able to get from San Francisco. The latest reports there, a deal could happen by the end of the weekend. Really, the first domino to fall when you kind of put feelers out there, DK was going to get paid first, followed by Deebo. And we were talking about that report from Sheena Quick, the reporter who covers the Panthers in South Carolina. That's where Deebo is also from. She was on the Pat McAfee show and said the expectation is that a deal might get done by the end of the weekend, but also said the DK Metcalf contract could impact that, and then Deebo ended up getting paid. With that, I do want to ask you this before we get into these Garoppolo nuggets. Will Deebo get more or less, let's say on an average annual value basis, as compared to DK Metcalf? Give me an M for more, L for less in the comment section right now. For DK, what's interesting is that he's going to be 28 years old when this deal expires. He can cash in again after that, but he signs this deal with no long-term security or immediate security at the quarterback position in Seattle. And Jeff Darlington had tweeted this last night after that contract was made official. I have great respect for John Schneider, but man, the Seahawks should avoid wasting one of those years with DK and get themselves Jimmy Garoppolo ASAP. And it makes a lot of sense. Then Matt Mayoko said this after, and we've been talking about why Garoppolo to Seattle makes a whole lot of sense, because they have Drew Lock, Geno Smith, and Jacob Eason on that roster. And if you're paying DK Metcalf big-time money, don't you want to take advantage of him being in his prime, being at the peak of his powers, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and you're not sure what the quarterback class is going to be in next year's NFL draft? Why not trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, a player who you're very familiar with? So Mayoko piggybacked that from Darlington and put together an article on NBC Sports Bay Area and said, in part, the 49ers can be stubborn. They can keep Garoppolo on their roster until Tuesday, August 30th, when NFL clubs must trim the regular season limit to 53 players. The reason the Niners do not want to turn Garoppolo loose at this point has everything to do with keeping him away from the Seattle Seahawks, a fierce division rival, obviously, as we know. And Seattle has owned San Francisco over the last 8 to 10 years. The reason, Mayoko continued, the 49ers do not want to turn loose Garoppolo at this point has everything to do with keeping him away from Seattle. His spot among NFL quarterbacks might be in debate among the 49ers fan base, but he is generally considered a middle-tier starter and an obvious upgrade over the current options on that Seahawks roster. The 49ers would prefer Garoppolo does not end up with the Seahawks. That is something they will not entirely be able to control. Why? If no team steps up to present a trade offer, the Niners will be forced to release Garoppolo. Then he can sign with any team before the start of the regular season. Here's where things get interesting with the Niners trying to gain leverage if they end up releasing Jimmy G. And Mayoko pointed this out. At the very least, the Niners do not want to cut Garoppolo loose now, paving the way for him to sign with a division rival and getting a full training camp to become acclimated to the Seahawks offensive system. If the Seahawks want Garoppolo, they're going to have to either pay a pretty penny right now to acquire him rather than wait a month and reduce the chances that he can be playing at a high level early in the season. And with DK Metcalf signing a 3-year contract extension on Thursday, it seems even more logical the Seahawks would want the best possible answer at quarterback as quickly as possible. And if Jimmy D doesn't work out for Seattle, he's entering the final year of his deal. They could look elsewhere after this year. And it's understandable to see why the Niners do have some reservations about trading Garoppolo to Seattle. This is an organization that has fared very well against San Francisco. Their worst fears could become true if Trey Lance doesn't work out, and they made the mistake of drafting him, moving up to do so. He doesn't pan out. They don't go with Jimmy G a year after he helped lead them to the NFC Championship game. And then what does he do for Seattle? Helps lead them to, wins over San Francisco to alter their playoff chances, hand San Francisco some L's, or maybe even make a run at the playoffs. What's also interesting, too, is that if San Francisco wants to wait, because if he's on the roster week 1, that $24.2 million base salary becomes guaranteed. They want that leverage to not have Garoppolo have a bulk of training camp, or at least some of training camp and potentially the preseason, to get ready for the 49ers when they take on Seattle in week 2 on September 18th at home at Levi's Stadium. If you give him time to master the playbook, then he's going to be much more prepared for week 2 as compared to if you let him go just, a week and change before the regular season gets underway, and then you have the competitive advantage over Garoppolo because he hasn't had the time to prepare, play, practice with his new team, and at that point, what is the deal with his rehabilitation process when it comes down to that shoulder injury? So all of this really started with DK Metcalf, and we've talked about Garoppolo maybe getting traded to Seattle. It seems as though after that contract extension, it makes a little bit of sense for that now to happen. We'll continue to monitor this. We'll continue to keep an eye on it. This is going to be fascinating to follow because quarterback interdivision trades have happened before. Donovan McNabb was dealt from the Eagles at the tail end of his career to the Washington football team. There have been a couple of other instances in which quarterbacks have been traded within the division, but Seattle and the 49ers, it's one of the fiercest rivalries in all of the NFL, and if Garoppolo goes there, Trey Lance doesn't work out, you know who's going to look really, really bad? It's the San Francisco 49ers. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Keep it locked here on the 49ers Report. Going to hit the golf course right now, but wanted to bring you guys a new video to just keep you up to date with all things going down with the Niners. Appreciate all of you for tuning in, and anything that happens, whether it's breaking news, a signing, contract extension, big rumor, we'll continue to talk about it and chop it up with the faithful.